You're being selfish, Mom. A terrible mother. After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us. I'm standing in my kitchen right now, clutching my side where the pain shoots through like lightning, watching my son Devon pace back and forth like a caged animal. My daughter Eunice sits at my table, her arms crossed, wearing that look on her face I've seen 1,000 times before, entitlement mixed with pure rage. Devon slams his hand on the counter. The coffee mugs rattle. I flinch, but I don't move from where I'm standing. I can't. Not just because of the pain radiating through my rib cage, but because if I give an inch now, they'll take everything. Again, Eunice leans forward, her perfectly manicured nails drumming on my table, her voice dripping with venom as she repeats it, that I'm selfish, that I'm cruel, that I owe them. I almost laugh, almost, but laughing hurts too much now. You see, 20 minutes ago I told them no. Just that one simple word I should have learned to say decades ago. One word that changed everything. And 20 minutes ago, my son, my own flesh and blood, shoved me so hard against this kitchen cabinet that something in my chest cracked like a dry branch. The pain is unbelievable. Every breath feels like I'm being stabbed from the inside. But I stay standing. I have to. Because they don't know it yet, but they should have just walked away. They should have taken my no and left. Because the money they're demanding, the $180,000 from selling the beach property, that money was never going to save them from themselves. But what I'm about to tell them, the truth I've kept hidden for nearly 40 years, that will destroy everything they think they know about this family, about who they are, about what they're entitled to. My name is Agatha. I'm 64 years old. And this is the day I finally stopped being their ATM and started being honest. But before I tell you what happened in this kitchen, before I tell you the secret that's about to blow my children's world apart, I need you to understand how we got here. Because this didn't start today. This started 8 years ago, the day my husband died and my children disappeared from my life. If you've ever been betrayed by the people you sacrificed everything for, if you've ever wondered if you're wrong for finally putting yourself first, then subscribe to this channel right now. Because this story is about to get a whole lot more complicated. And let me ask you something. Have you ever had to choose between protecting yourself and protecting your children's feelings? Drop your answer in the comments, because I want to know if I'm the only one who waited too long to make that choice. But let me take you back, 8 years back, to the day my husband Robert died. Robert and I had been married for 37 years. We lived modestly, saved carefully, dreamed quietly. He was a contractor, worked with his hands his whole life. That beach property, 20 acres of scrubland about 40 minutes from the coast. That was his pride and joy. He bought it for almost nothing back in the 80s, always talking about building something there someday. A family compound, he used to say. I remember the funeral. It was a Tuesday in March, cold rain coming down in sheets. Eunice showed up late, left early, said she had a nail appointment she couldn't miss. Devon came in a suit I knew he couldn't afford. Spent the whole reception on his phone, doing some deal that was supposedly going to make him rich. They stayed for the will reading. Of course they did. Robert left me everything. The house, the property, his small pension, about 40,000 in savings. Eunice's face when the lawyer read the will, I'll never forget it. Like she'd been personally robbed. She pulled me aside after, asked if I was sure Dad really wanted to leave it all to me. Suggested maybe there was another will, a newer one. Maybe Dad wasn't in his right mind at the end. I told her to go home. That was 8 years ago. 8 years of silence. Oh, they called on my birthday, most years. Quick calls, asking how I was doing in that tone that really means they're waiting for you to finish talking. Eunice sent me a fruit basket once. Devon texted me every few months with updates about his latest business venture, always on the verge of making it big, always needing just a little more capital. But visit, help, be there when I needed them, never. What they didn't know, what they never bothered to ask about, was how bad things got after Robert died. The house started falling apart almost immediately. The water heater died that first winter. I wore 3 sweaters and heated water on the stove for baths. The roof started leaking. I put buckets in the attic and prayed. The foundation cracked. The porch sagged. I couldn't afford to fix any of it. Robert's pension barely covered my property taxes and utilities. The $40,000 in savings evaporated fast. Emergency room visit, new tires, a new furnace when the old one started filling the house with carbon monoxide. By year 3, I was eating 1 meal a day and calling it intermittent fasting. By year 5, I was pulling coins from Robert's old jar in the garage to buy bread and eggs. And my children, they had no idea, because they never asked. Eunice was busy with her life, 3 hours away, big house with a pool, her social media full of vacation photos, restaurant check-ins, shopping hauls. Devon was even worse, in and out of jobs, always chasing the next big thing, cryptocurrency, day trading, a protein powder, MLM, an app that was going to revolutionize something. Neither of them knew about the nights I sat in the dark to save electricity. Neither of them knew I stopped taking my blood pressure medication because I couldn't afford both pills and groceries. Neither of them knew I'd started having dizzy spells, fainting episodes that left me on the bathroom floor wondering if this was how it would end. If you've ever felt invisible to the people you raised, hit that subscribe button right now. Then came last September. September 16th. I collapsed in the grocery store, just went down like someone cut my strings, right there in the cereal aisle. I woke up in an ambulance. The hospital kept me for 3 days. On the 3rd day, Dr. Patel came in with that expression doctors get when they're about to change your life. She told me I had a heart condition, congenital, but worsening, made worse by stress, malnutrition, untreated hypertension. She used words like valve replacement and surgical intervention. Then she told me what it would cost, $60,000, maybe $70,000, maybe more. I asked her what happened if I didn't do it. She didn't sugarcoat it. 2 years, maybe 3. Quality of life declining rapidly. Eventually, my heart would just give up. I didn't call my children. What was the point? They'd shown me exactly who they were for 8 years. Instead, I went home. I sat in Robert's old chair, and I thought about that beach property. Robert always said that land would be worth something someday. He was right. The area had been developing, new highway access, resort construction, wealthy people looking for coastal investment properties. That scrubland Robert bought for $18,000 in 1984 was now worth real money. I called a real estate agent. Her name was Patricia. 3 weeks later, she called me with an offer, $180,000, cash sale, quick close. I told her yes before she finished the sentence. The closing was handled quietly. I didn't tell anyone. I walked out with a cashier's check that felt like it weighed 100 pounds. For the first time in 8 years, I could breathe. I deposited the money, paid off my debts, scheduled the house repairs, new roof, fixed foundation, working water heater. I made appointments with Dr. Patel to discuss surgery timing, and I started planning something else, a small scholarship fund at the community college in Robert's name for kids studying trades, carpentry, construction, kids like Robert had been. That's what the money was for, survival and legacy. I should have known it couldn't stay secret forever. They showed up on a Saturday morning, no call, no warning. I heard car doors slam and looked out the window to see both of them walking up my driveway like they owned the place. My stomach dropped. Eunice was wearing designer sunglasses and carrying a purse that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Devon had on expensive sneakers and a leather jacket I knew he couldn't afford. I opened the door before they could knock. Eunice breezed past me like she'd been here yesterday instead of not at all for 3 years. Devon followed, looking around the house with an expression I couldn't quite read. My daughter turned to me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She said they'd been worried about me, that they realized they hadn't been around enough, that family was important and they wanted to reconnect. I waited, because I knew my children. This wasn't a social call. Devon walked over to the kitchen window. He made a comment about the new roof, about how the porch looked different, about how I must have come into some money somehow. There it was. Eunice sat down at my table without being invited. She told me she'd heard the beach property had sold, that she was curious why I hadn't mentioned it, that surely I was planning to share the news with my own children. I stayed standing. My heart was already racing, but I kept my voice level. I told them yes, I'd sold the property. It was mine to sell. Their father left it to me. Devon turned from the window. He wanted to know how much. I didn't answer. Eunice's smile evaporated. She said this was a family matter, that the property was part of their inheritance, that I had no right to make these decisions without consulting them. Something cold settled in my chest. I asked her what inheritance she was talking about, what family she was referring to, the one where I didn't hear from either of them for months at a time. The one where they couldn't be bothered to visit even once while I was living on pennies and prayers. Devon stepped closer. He told me not to be dramatic, that they were busy, that they had their own lives. I almost laughed. Instead, I told them exactly why I sold the property. The medical bills, the house repairs, the 8 years of silence and neglect. And I told them that the money was mine, earned through 37 years of marriage and 8 years of survival they knew nothing about. Have you ever had family members who only showed up when they thought there was money involved? Drop your answer in the comments. That's when everything changed. Eunice stood up from the table. Her voice went sharp, cutting through the tension like a knife. She said I was being unreasonable, that she knew I'd gotten at least $150,000 for that land, probably more, that the least I could do was share some of it with my own children. I asked her why. Why should I give them anything when they'd given me nothing but absence? Devon jumped in then. He said he needed money, a business investment opportunity that couldn't wait. $20,000 would change his life, would get him on his feet. This was his shot, his big break. Eunice nodded eagerly. She said she needed money too, about $30,000. Her husband's sales numbers were down. They'd overextended on the house. Credit cards were maxed out. She said it so casually, like I was supposed to feel sorry for her drowning in a pool while I'd been dying of thirst. I told them no. Just that. No. Devon's face changed. The mask of the concerned son cracked right down the middle. He told me I owed them. That everything I had was because of Dad, and Dad was there. Father, too. That I was being selfish and cruel. I told him to leave. Eunice stood up then, her voice rising. She called me bitter, said I'd always played favourites, always been cold, always cared more about martyrdom than about being an actual mother, that maybe if I'd been different, they would have stayed around more. And that's when something in me snapped, not broke, snapped into focus. I told them the truth, all of it, how they'd abandoned me the day Robert died, how Eunice had asked for money 6 times in 8 years, but never once asked how I was doing, how Devon had called me crying about his failed ventures, but never thought to ask if I needed help, how I'd nearly died on a grocery store floor and spent 3 days in the hospital without either of them knowing, because why would they? They never called unless they wanted something. I told them about skipping medication, about eating 1 meal a day, about sitting in the dark, about the dizzy spells and the fear and the nights. I wondered if I'd wake up the next morning, and I told them that no, they weren't getting a penny of that money. Not now, not ever. Devon took a step toward me. His hands were clenched into fists. I should have seen it coming. Maybe part of me did. Devon had always had a temper, even as a child. But this was different. This was cold rage. He told me I was making a mistake, that he wasn't leaving without what he was owed. I told him he was owed nothing. Eunice tried to play mediator then, but her voice was shaking with barely controlled fury. She said we should all calm down, that we could work this out. That family was supposed to take care of each other. I asked her where that family had been for the last 8 years. That's when Devon moved. He crossed the kitchen in 2 steps and grabbed my arm, told me to stop being difficult, to just give them the money and they'd leave. I tried to pull away. I'm not a large woman, never have been, and at 64 with a failing heart. I'm even weaker than I used to be, but I pulled anyway. He yanked me toward him. I stumbled, and then he shoved me, hard. I went backwards, my hip catching the edge of the kitchen cabinet. There was a crack. I heard it more than felt it at first, and then the pain hit like a train. I went down on the floor, gasping, unable to breathe properly. Devon stood over me, his face pale. For just a second I saw fear there, recognition of what he'd done. Eunice rushed over, but not to help me. She grabbed Devon's arm, hissing at him about being stupid, about police, about this being too far. I lay on my kitchen floor, the pain in my side so intense I thought I might pass out, but I didn't. I stayed conscious through sheer force of will, because I needed to see their faces when I told them the truth they didn't know. If this story is resonating with you, subscribe now, because what I'm about to reveal will change everything. I managed to sit up, leaning against the cabinet. Every breath sending shards of agony through my chest. My voice came out thin but steady. I told them they should sit down. Devon was still pale, backing away from me like I might explode. Eunice had gone very still, her eyes calculating. She was already thinking about liability, about witnesses, about how to spin this. I repeated myself, "Sit down, both of you." Something in my tone made them obey. They sat at my kitchen table and I stayed on the floor, because trying to stand would have broken me. I told them there was something they needed to know. something I'd kept from them their entire lives because Robert thought it was the right thing to do. Because we thought family was about more than blood. Because we were naive enough to believe that love could overcome biology. Eunice's face went very white. Devon just stared. I told them that 39 years ago, when I was 25, and Robert was 33, we found out we couldn't have children. Not naturally, not easily, possibly not at all. We tried for years, spent money we didn't have, on doctors and tests and treatments that went nowhere. We were devastated, Robert especially. He'd wanted to be a father more than anything, so we made a decision. We decided to adopt. The silence in the kitchen was absolute. The only sound was my laboured breathing and the distant hum of the refrigerator. I told them we went through an agency, spent months in home studies and interviews and waiting, and finally we were matched with a teenage mother who was giving up her baby, a little girl born in March of 1987. Eunice's hands had started shaking. I kept talking. My voice was steady now, stronger despite the pain. We named her Eunice, brought her home from the hospital when she was 3 days old, loved her like she was ours because she was ours. Every way that mattered, she was ours. 3 years later, we got a call from the same agency. The same birth mother had another baby, a boy this time. She was in even worse shape than before. Addiction, homelessness, no support system. She wanted the baby to go to the same family that had taken her daughter. She wanted them to grow up together. We didn't hesitate. We said yes immediately. Devon, born in November of 1990, brought home at 4 days old. Our son. I watched their faces as the truth settled over them like ash. Eunice's mouth was open, wordless. Devon looked like he'd been punched. I told them we'd planned to tell them when they were older, when they could understand. But the years went by, and it never seemed like the right time. They were happy, well-adjusted, thriving. Why disrupt that? Why make them feel different when they'd never been anything but completely ours? Robert had been adamant about waiting. He wanted to tell them together, the right way, with care and context. But then he got sick, and in those final months there were so many other things to worry about. And then he was gone, and I was alone, and telling them felt like opening a wound that couldn't heal. So I didn't. I let them believe the lie, the comfortable fiction that we were a family bound by blood, when really we were a family bound by choice, by love, by the daily decision to show up and be present and care. A choice they'd stopped making the moment Robert died. Here's my question. Do you think parents should always tell their adopted children the truth, or are there situations where keeping it private is the right choice? I need to know what you think in the comments. Devon found his voice first. He asked if this was a joke, some sick way of punishing them. I told him I'd never been more serious in my life. Eunice's face had gone from white to red. She said it didn't matter, that they were still family, that adoption meant they were legally our children and entitled to everything. I nodded. Yes, I said, legally, you're my children, which is why the house will go to you when I die, why my pension will be split between you, why every legal document I have names you as beneficiaries. But the beach property, that wasn't part of the marriage assets. That was Robert's before we married. He bought it with money he'd saved, working construction as a young man, and when he died it passed to me as his widow, but morally, philosophically, it was his. And Robert had very specific feelings about that property. I pulled myself up using the cabinet. gritting my teeth against the pain. I made it to the counter where my purse sat and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was a letter, written in Robert's handwriting, dated 2 weeks before he died. He'd given it to me with instructions to open it only if something specific happened. If our children ever came demanding money, if they ever showed their true colours. Robert had known, somehow, in those final weeks, he'd known exactly who they'd become. I unfolded the letter and started to read. The letter was addressed to both of them. Robert wrote that he loved them, that adopting them had been the greatest joy of his life, that watching them grow up, seeing them become who they were, had made every hardship worthwhile. But he also wrote that he wasn't blind, that in the last years he'd seen how they treated me, how they called only when they needed something, how they'd started viewing us as assets rather than parents. He wrote that the beach property was his insurance policy, his way of making sure I'd be taken care of if things got bad, that the money from that land was meant for my care, my health, my survival, not for bailouts, not for rescuing adult children from their own bad decisions. He wrote that if they were reading this letter, it meant they'd come demanding, expecting, feeling entitled. And he wrote that he was disappointed, but not surprised. The letter ended with a single paragraph that I read slowly, making sure every word landed. Robert wrote that he loved them enough to give them everything he had while he was alive. His time, his patience, his money, his name, but he loved me enough to make sure I'd be protected after he was gone, that choosing between enabling their irresponsibility and ensuring my survival wasn't a choice at all. The property money was mine, all of it, to do with as I saw fit, and if they couldn't accept that, if they couldn't respect it, then they'd learned nothing from having him as a father. I folded the letter and put it back in my purse. The pain in my side was making me nauseous, but I stayed standing. I told them I'd honoured Robert's wishes. The money was going toward my medical care and toward a scholarship in his name. Nothing for them. Not now, not ever. Not after today, because today they'd shown me exactly who they'd become, and it was no one Robert would recognise. Eunice stood up so fast her chair tipped over. She said I was lying, that the letter was fake, that I'd forged it to justify being cruel. I told her she was welcome to have it tested. The letterhead was from Robert's contractor business. The signature was witnessed by his lawyer, who still had a copy on file. She could waste her money on proving what she already knew was true if it made her feel better. Devon was just sitting there staring at nothing. All the fight had gone out of him. Eunice grabbed her purse, told me I was dead to her, that she'd never forgive this, that I was a bitter old woman who deserved to die alone. I told her I was already alone, had been for 8 years. This just made it official. She stormed out. Devon followed like a ghost, not even looking at me as he left. I stood in my kitchen listening to their car doors slam, listening to them speed away down my street, and then I very carefully lowered myself into a chair and called 911 because my ribs were definitely broken and I needed to document what had happened for the police report, for the restraining order I'd be filing, for the final permanent ending to a relationship that had been dead for 8 years anyway. That was 6 months ago. I'm sitting in my living room now, the evening sun coming through windows that don't leak anymore. My ribs healed. The surgery on my heart is scheduled for next month, and Dr. Patel says my prognosis is good. The house is fixed, solid, warm, safe. The scholarship fund in Robert's name, awarded its first recipient last week, a young woman studying carpentry. She sent me a thank you card that's sitting on my mantel right now. I haven't heard from Eunice or Devon. The restraining order ensures I won't. Sometimes I think about them and feel sad, not for what I lost, but for what they lost. The chance to know their father's real legacy, the chance to understand what family actually means. But mostly I feel peace. I learned something in these past years that I wish I'd learned sooner, that you can't love people into loving you back. That sacrifice without boundaries isn't noble, it's just slow suicide. That sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let people face the consequences of their choices. My children wanted my money. They got a truth that will follow them forever. And me, I got my life back, however much of it I have left. That seems like a fair trade. If this story moved you, if you've ever had to choose yourself over people who only saw you as an ATM, hit that subscribe button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that it's okay to set boundaries, even with family. And drop a comment telling me, was I wrong to keep the adoption secret for so long? Or did my children prove exactly why Robert's letter was necessary? Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it helps someone out there find the courage to finally say no.